Good morning, dear friends. Today is Monday, the 3rd of the 12th of July. We're studying the entire Talmud, one page, one line at a time. Presently, Ch6, Shabbas, chapter 6. We're on 62A or B. See exactly what we're up to. And we are in the midst of discussing an important topic about what can be worn, and more specifically, what may not be worn on Shabbos. Not everything you wear on your person automatically becomes a garment. Not everything you wear on your person automatically is considered an ornament or an adornment. And we closed out yesterday by a discussion. It was a brief discussion about, or as a continuation of a previous discussion, briefly about rings. And the Mishnah mentions that men cannot wear a ring that does not have a seal, women cannot wear a ring with a seal. And we tried understanding if it's not possible that because something is considered ornamental for one gender, it should be considered ornamental for the other gender. And that was our discussion 2 days ago. And then yesterday we further inquired and we said, listen, I understand that sometimes, so our question was, maybe it's not an ornament.
Can I have some more coffee?
But even if it's not considered an ornament, it's not the derech to carry something looped on your finger. You usually put it in your hand, in your pocket. There are certain things that are conventional, typical manners of carrying that would have the biblical, would be problematic on a biblical level. And there are other ways of carrying that are kelachayad, that are indirect. And although it's certainly not allowed on Shabbos, it would not rise to the level of a biblical prohibition. And so the Gemara answered, quite interestingly, that although there are certain rings that a man would never wear in the time of the Mishnah, in the time of the Gemara, there are certain rings that a woman would never wear as an ornament or for part of their look in the time of the Mishnah. However, it is not implausible that they would wear it to carry it. Namely, when the spouse has to bring the ring somewhere else to assist or as a chesed to their spouse, they might wear it on their finger. And Reb Allen, our kohen, is not yet pointed out that it's reasonable in a time where there was not many places to secure stuff, that the safest place might have been on your person. Therefore, if the ring is not an ornament, it's considered carrying. And even though it's on your ring, on your finger, which might not be the typical way of carrying everything, it is an entirely probable and likely way to carry a ring, and therefore it would be a problem, and you have to bring a carbon chatas, as the Mishnah cites, if one were to carry the ring, or wear the ring rather, in a public domain. That was yesterday's Gemara. Now we'll share the screen and continue with some new definitions, some new discussions. Here we go. And in addition to the names that we mentioned, the Refuah Shlema, before the recording started, let's dedicate our learning. Today is the final day of Shiva. Well, we're in the midst of Shiva for so many, and so we'll dedicate more broadly our learning for those that were found and those that have yet to be found in the terrible Surfside tragedy. But particularly, I want to mention the Ainsworths, Reb Daniel Tzvi, and again, I don't remember the parent's name, and Ita, who are both Basa, Reb Yosef, I think it is, who a couple that lived down the block from us until very recently, and they are unfortunately both. What? Yosef Mordechai. Okay, yeah, Ita Bas Yosef Mordechai. So we'll dedicate our learning for their neshama, their neshama Shem Aliyah, and Klal Yisrael should have only good news and Basuras Tavis and protection during this time. Our Mishnah now, let's launch our Gemara. Let's just be formatted. For some reason, resists this format. There we go. Our Mishnah continues to elaborate other items that a person mustn't wear on Shabbos. And I believe these are part of the women's catalog. So the Mishnah says, a woman oughtn't to wear a koliyar or a chovelis. I got good news for you. We don't know what these words are, but the Gemara too wishes to verify and clarify what exactly these things are. So the Gemara asks, my koliyar, what is this koliyar? Amar Rav answers, machbanta. It's a machbanta, which which again, the Gemara may not know what a kolear is. We don't know what a machbanta is either. But thankfully, we have Rabbi Steinsaltz who tells us it's a brooch, with which a woman what?
Brooch.
Brooch, B-R-O-O.
It's spelled brooch, but it's not.
All right, brooch. As you can tell, I've never worn a brooch, but I'm okay. That a woman fastens the collar of her garments. If you want to look at Rashi, Rashi says the same thing. He gives us a old French word in Sashim Chavenes, Mikosheres, it fastens. Yes.
Isn't it a bit weird to say you're not allowed to wear something and then ask a question, what is that?
You're asking a good question. It's very simple. Obviously, the sages of the Mishnah knew what it was. But several hundred years later, the Jews are no longer living in Roman Palestine. And I call it Palestine only because the Romans renamed Eretz Yisrael in this era to be Palestine. And so those Chachamim spoke Hebrew and probably had a Roman influence. And so they might have known what the Koleir and the Chobelis is. But a few hundred years later, in Bavel, in Iraq, a different language was spoken. And not everybody was there when the Mishnah was being established. So the sages of the Gemara, for our benefit, asked this question. But of course, language continues to evolve. And today we don't speak, if it was Persian or Middle Persian or Old Persian or Roman for that matter, or Latin, I should say. We don't even speak Old French. And so if you think about it, we're going through a very interesting process right now, where we have a word that was Mishnah, it was incorporated into Mishnah Hebrew, though probably influenced by Latin or Greek. And then we have it translated into the language of the Talmud. Rashi translates it into his language, into Old French, and then gives us a Hebrew translation that we could apply more broadly. And then we have Rabbi Steinsaltz giving us the English translation. So we have this very interesting process and journey, realizing that one of the gifts and challenges that the Jewish people had the opportunity to deal with is many different languages and to keep fresh with the definitions. And so that's what the Gemara is doing for us right over here. Now, if we wanted to really get creative, maybe creative is the wrong word. If we really want to get into this, we can take a look at the Old French words. Anyone want to take a step? Beryl, how do you say that? Nosha, nosha, noscha, nosha. I don't know. But anyways, they choose to translate it as a pin or a clasp, and that seems to be what Rashi and Rabbi Steinsaltz are describing. And now our internet is asking us to be patient. Go. We're back. All right, so now we know, according to Rav, what a koleir is. It's a kind of clasp, brooch, or whatever your brooch, however you pronounce it. Now, what's a koveles? Amarav, Rav says, chomarta de filon. It is a chomarta de filon, Rashi. Kesher sekosher boisam. It's a kind of knot or pouch that carries a certain spice, herb, sheshmo filon. It's called filon. The reichai arev, that has a very sweet smell. Uvelaz, and in the spoken language is called balsamo. The isha shereichai ra tayanasei aleha, and sometimes a person has body odor, they smell foully, they might want to carry around a little bundle of pleasant smelling stuff to help displace or overpower the smells that the person has. Recalling that in the time of the Mishnah, the time of the Gemara, and probably in the time of Rashi, they didn't quite have all of the hygienic opportunities we have today. And so Rav says that a person might carry around this little bundle of fragrant herbs to help in lieu of deodorant or in lieu of perfume. Ravasi, and Ravasi similarly gave the same definition, kumarta de filon, this kind of bundle of fragrant herbs. Now, our Mishnah tells us this clasp and these herbs, although they are worn, it's not considered a garment and it's not considered an ornament. It has another function, which is not acceptable according to our Mishnah, according to our Gemara on Shabbos. All right, let's take a fast peek here. Let's see. The Shulchan Aruch. Here's the English translation. Woman should not go out wearing the same an ornament that joins the opening of a cloak, or a knotted bag, which she would wear from her neck, containing spices that produce a pleasant fragrance. So there you have it, brought down in Allah as well. Now, I think I remember going once to a what do you call it? Those fairs. Oh, what do you call it? No. Like they try to like remake medieval. There's a word for it. What do you call those fairs? Anyways, I think I recall it.
Is it a reenactment or something?
It's
or?
not something like that. I'm forgetting the word. But anyways,
Yeah, I know.
so there they have folks dressing in medieval kind of clothing. And if I recall correctly, many of them were wearing some kind of external deodorant packet. And I guess it worked for them. Anyway, okay. Tana Rabbanan. So this is Rav's definitions of the words found in the Mishnah. One is a clasp and one is a smell-related accessory. Tana Rabbanan. Let's quote a brisa that also discusses these items. A person shouldn't wear a kovelas, which again is this bundle of herbs. And if she did wear it on Shabbos, she must bring a sin offering because this is a biblical transgression. According to Dibri Rabbi Meir, this is the opinion of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir has the most strict stance when it comes to this kovelas, when it comes to this air freshener. One would be liable for a chatas if they wore it out on Shabbos. The sages have a different viewpoint. They say loy seitzei. They consider this prohibition to be rabbinic in nature. Don't do it. The imyatzasa, but if she did wear it out on Shabbos, pitura, she is exempt from the biblical penalties and culpabilities. Rabbi Eliezer has a third opinion and says, you're absolutely permitted to wear this kovelet on Shabbos. Three different opinions about if you're allowed to wear it out on Shabbos.
It would probably be based on their wives, whether.
Oh, Rebel. So it's interesting that you say that. I'm not sure. But you actually are predicting the next question that Gemara is going to ask, but not in so many words. So Rebel just asked the question. What is the source? What is the rationale behind these three different opinions? Why can't they all agree? And is there some kind of difference in their viewpoint on Shabbos, on carrying, or maybe on this where Rebel was getting at? Maybe it has to do with the preferences of their wives, or maybe their own. Again, I'm not suggesting
Shalom bias,
or I'm not actually suggesting this, but maybe Rebel is saying maybe it has to do with their sense of smell. The stronger your sense of smell is, the more you might be very, very eager to have an air freshener around. So let's see how the Gemara tries to understand the differences of opinion, and we'll see how close the Gemara's comment is to Rebel's comment. Interesting to see. So Rebel, you see, but my comment, can you please explain what exactly are they really arguing about? There is the technical aspect of the disagreement. Can you wear this item or not? But what's really under the surface? Here we go. Rabbi Meir Savar Masayu. Rabbi Meir looks at this thing you wear on the air freshener that you wear on your string, quite literally as a burden. You're carrying something. And so if you wear it out into the public domain, what are you doing? You're carrying this little bundle of pleasant smelling spices and herbs. Rabbanan Sabri, the rabbis, and this is a very interesting exercise because it's a good recap of the three reasons or the three perspectives generally on something that you may or may not do. So Rabbi Meir says it's a burden, it's a masa, you're carrying it in the public domain. That is a biblical prohibition. Rabbanan Sabri, the rabbis say no. Ch6. It is, in truth, an ornament. It's something that completes the look. It's normal to wear it. You should be able to wear it, except we're worried. The Dilma, Shofa, Machria. She might want to take it off to show her friends her new custom blend of herbs that they put together with her, I don't know, fashion and olfactory consultants. I'm not sure what we'd call that person. But anyways, so she might want to show off the new blend that she bought. It's the latest in Paris, and everyone should see it. The Asya Lasuya, and she may end up taking it off to show it off, and now she's going to carry it. So times have changed a bit, but apparently that was a reasonable concern according to the Chacham. Rashi. Hilkach, being that it ultimately is an ornament, there is no problem to carry it essentially. But the Chachamim do not want you to do so because you're coming so close to potentially carrying on Shabbos, and the Chachamim have a responsibility to assist Jewish people to observe the laws and not to be led astray. As I mentioned, the teaching of the Balatanya in Likutei Torah yesterday, that Hashem, in His great love for the Jewish people, provide different anchors, hooks, and ways for us to stay connected and protected from falling out of compliance with the Torah mitzvah. So Rabbanan say you're carrying. I'm sorry. Rabbi Meir says you're carrying. Rabbanan say no, it's part of the look. Rabbi Lazar Savar. Rabbi Lazar says let's think very carefully about this packet of herbs. Man darka lamir mei. Who is the kind of person that goes around carrying this packet of herbs? Isha shirei chayra, a person that's struggling with body odor, in a particularly pungent and confounding case of body odor. Isha shirei chayra, le'sholpo machla. You don't get up in the middle of shul and announce, "Hey, folks, I'm trying to get my body odor under control," and so therefore it's improbable that she's going to want to draw a lot of attention and remove this packet from her person. And therefore, it's not likely that you'll end up carrying it. Rashi, she's likely to leave it on her. She's not likely to take it off her neck. She's going to leave it on. Shegnusula, says Rashi, because this is ultimately something that's a little bit of a personal struggle, not something that they're looking to make very public. Although, of course, the public is impacted by this struggle. So I don't mean to be insensitive to any kind of struggle. But so it's an interesting. So now, Rebberal, I'm not sure if you're wrong. It's curious to try to understand where and why each of them see these items in a different light.
No, it would make sense because if a rabbi knows that his wife wears that strictly for that, and another rabbi that doesn't have that problem and still wears it, he has a different attitude.
So again, it may be the case. I don't know, but it is interesting to consider. So now the Gemara is presented with us the underlying philosophy or the underlying perspective of this bundle. But Rebberal is saying we don't know what exactly influenced each of them to have a distinct perspective on why it is so.
Rabbi, wouldn't it make sense to have these kind of problems in halacha stated? It's okay to do whatever it is, but be very careful not to take it off or whatever issue might be.
I think the Chachamim have the understanding that telling someone to be very careful doesn't mitigate a true likely mistake.
No, but I'm trying to think, is there somewhere in Shulchan Aruch that kind of a dictate that, if you do this, it would be acceptable, but be careful not to go across a line or whatever. I'm just trying to think.
I'm trying to think now. It's not coming to me, but I believe there are certain instances where we do.
I think it runs contrary to a general attitude towards building a fence around the Torah. That is, all the series of muktzeh could have been eliminated by saying, yes, of course, you can move this hammer, but don't try to use it to hit the nail. But they chose not to say that, but just to introduce prohibitions to prevent people from doing that. Obviously, they didn't believe that a warning would prevent people from doing that. And
yes,
here.
Exactly. The Chachamim are the professor said it in better words, but the Chachamim believe that if one is truly at risk to messing up, a warning is not going to really help, because human nature is deeply wired into our being, and we have certain social characteristics that run very deep in our wiring, and other natural. We fidget with stuff and we take things off if it's uncomfortable. And so the Chachamim believe that if an item is truly vulnerable or susceptible to unintentional abuse, the instinct might be to create a takana, particularly at certain times where it becomes an ongoing issue. So Beryl, I don't know exactly why, but I am willing to agree that it's possible that this packet was more or less prevalent in different areas, different times, different communities, different societies. And so I'm not coming up with a perfect answer here about why each rabbi understands this same packet to be different, beyond that it's apparent that not everybody would wear them, from the Gemara's words. Only certain people would wear them. So it's interesting. The Chachamim, I mean, not the Chachamim, the Achronim, there's discussion about why we don't look at this packet like a kameya mumcha. And so the obvious answer is that the kameya is there really for an illness. And this is not really an illness. This is just a response to a challenge. Now I understand that, and Dr. Hammer, you're muted, and I don't know if you were saying anything, but I could understand that you would, following your mahalach, there's something bothersome that you're not going to allow a person to preserve their dignity and maintain this packet discreetly, and perhaps that's actually what Rabbi Elazar is saying. You understand that it's about a person's dignity, and because the person themselves is not going to show it off because it's all about their dignity and it's a private struggle, well then it's improbable that they're going to take it off, and therefore we should err on the side of accommodation. And so perhaps that's something else to read into the words of Rabbi Eliezer. The Rashba, again, I'm reading the footnotes up here. The Rashba explains that why, according to the Chachamim, why don't we understand like Rabbi Elazar that this person is not going to want to take it off because of the shame involved? And so the Rashba explains, and again, I'm reading here in the footnotes of the Gemara here, that there's no additional shame. Everybody understands that there is this packet. You could smell it. You can smell the pleasant spices, and you understand that it's coming to mask an unpleasant smell. Being that it's no secret, everyone knows about it. So according to the Chachamim, she might still show it off to show how effective it is, or what a solid blend they've got. By the way, in case you're getting nervous, why aren't we talking about men? My understanding is that probably all the men smelled really bad, and there was probably nothing. They probably gave up on that fight. I may be wrong, but it's an interesting. It's something else to consider. Okay, now let's see the Gemara. The Gemara is not yet done with this discussion. Rabbi Eliezer here says that it's mutter, right? And the Mishnah says it's totally mutter. So the Gemara is not going to challenge that. Although you said it's mutter, is it really mutter? Are you really meant to carry it, to go around with it? V'atanya, there's a brisa that teaches a little differently. Rabbi Eliezer poiter b'chayveles uv'sloiches shel palyatin. There's another text, the brisa, that says that Rabbi Eliezer is poiter. What does the word poiter mean? What does the word poiter mean? It means, doctor?
No, I had it slipped my tongue.
So it's very similar to the word patur. Patur means exempt. You're off the hook. You're not in trouble.
Right.
Now there's a problem with the word patur. Patur, and the Rambam actually clarifies this very explicitly in the intro to his works on Ch6 Shabbas, but it's inferred from our Gemara as well. Patur means you're not on the hook for a biblical prohibition, avol aser, but you shouldn't do it. And so in our previous text, Rabbi Eliezer says, "Yaisa isha b'chayveles lechatchila." You can do it. This other text, this other brisa, says poiter. You're off the hook, but you shouldn't do it. So our question is, which is it? What does Rabbi Eliezer say? Lechatchila, wear it into shul, wear the air freshener, or not? It's probably very offensive that I'm calling this an air freshener. I just don't know the technical term for this. We could just use the Mishnah's word. We'll just call it a koveles. So is it are you allowed to wear the kofeles or not? So the more answer is loy kasha. It's not really a contradiction. Hakikai. Ad Rabbi Meir. When does he say that it's potter? When he's contrasting with Rabbi Meir, who says that it's totally prohibited. So he's not saying potter, but you shouldn't do it. He's saying that you're exempt, as opposed to the viewpoint of Rabbi Meir. So basically, there's a different language you use depending on who you're arguing with and what the terms of the disagreement are. And so when Rabbi Meir says you may absolutely not do it, it's biblical. He says no, it's not biblical. It's not a biblical problem. Potter. But when he says mutar lechatchila, it's because he's contrasting his viewpoint against the Chachamim who say potter abel aser. He say you can do it, you shouldn't do it, but you're not off the hook. So then he's even more clear to make sure that his opinion is contrast against the other more lenient opinion. So when he's contrasting with Rabbi Meir, he says potter. When he's contrasting with the Chacham, he says mutar lechatchila. I believe that's the pshat here in the Gemara. Ki hadik tani potter. When does he use the word potter? Contrasting with Rabbi Meir. When he says mutar lechatchila, it's contrasting with the rabbis that are also more inclined to be lenient. You see, the Gemara itself elaborates. I told it to you before the Gemara. When he's arguing with Rabbi Meir, who uses the word chayiv chatas, he says, no, you're not chayiv chatas, you're potter. But then when he's, again, it's exactly what I just said outside of the Gemara. When he's responding to the rabbis who say, potter al aser, you shouldn't do it. I'm sorry, you're not going to have a biblical prohibition, but you shouldn't do it. Amar ihu mutar lechatchila. So then he says it's entirely permissible. So it's interesting how sometimes the language you use doesn't just tell you about your own viewpoint, but it also is a clue to what you're responding to. Because depending on who you're talking to and how you're responding, you might use different words to make the very same case. And that's what the Gemara is teaching us here. So of course, the Gemara is giving us this principle in the analysis of two different texts on the subject of the Kovelas, but I think it's a good life lesson as well. Sometimes you hear half a conversation and you're like, hey, the guy's contradicting themselves, but you have to have the whole context to understand why a person is using the choice of words that they are. All right. We're now turning the page, 62b, Samach Beis, Amud Beis. We're marching through the Talmud, line by line, page by page. The Gemara continues our conversation. Umay Rabbi Meir. What exactly? Give us the text. Give us the full citation. We quoted a brisa here that says like this. Look, V'atanya Rabbi Elazar Poiter. We gave us a snippet of a conversation. The Gemara now is going to ask, can you please give us the full citation? What exactly was he responding to Rabbi Meir? Umay Rabbi Meir, what was the response that Rabbi Elazar gave to Rabbi Meir? That led him to use the word potter, which in this context means totally permitted, even though sometimes potter is a more nuanced word. The Tanya, here's the brisa. A woman mustn't carry a key. Dim yatzasa or yatzas, but if she did carry the key, chayeves chatas, this could be a biblical prohibition. Divrei Rabbi Meir, this was what Rabbi Meir said. And then the Gemara continues, the Brisa continues. Rabbi Eliezer Poiter v'chayveles of v'sleichas shel payatin. Eliezer says, you know what? When it comes to kaveles and the sleichas shel payatin, which by the way this was quoted in our Mishnah, those are pater. Let's read Rashi. My Rabbi Meir. Hecha ashkechon the Iri bar Rabbi Meir b'loy Rabbanan upolig Rabbi Elazar alehu. Where do we have a conversation where we only have Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Elazar conversing without the Chachamim giving a third opinion? Usually, Rashi explains to us, we are presented with three opinions. And therefore, you always are going to have these three tiers, these three perspectives. Asur, Potter, Mutar lechatchila. Entirely prohibited, not ideal, but not biblical, and go ahead. So we catch them having a private conversation without the Chachamim involved in the instance of the above mentioned text that we just read. This next Rashi is meant to be attached, I believe, to the next Gemara. All right, continue. So now the Gemara says, hold on. Let's go back to our Brisa. Look at the Brisa again, one more time. And folks, tell me if I'm going too fast, too slow, too explanatory, not enough. Just we're like changing the Gemara's style is changing a bit, so I'm trying to make sure that we're clear. Again, we quoted a Brisa, which was meant to show us where there was a conversation between Rabbi Meir and Chacham. And that Brisa basically has Rabbi Meir commenting about a key. And and then Rabbi Elazar talking about a different item. He's talking about this bundle of herbs and this jug of balsam oil. By the way, let me stop here for a second. That's the text. The next Gemara is going to be a question about that. But let me ask you like this. Can anyone, now that we have this text before us and we read Rashi that we know what's inside the kovelas, can you see why we might bundle together the kovelas and the tzloches shel payatin, the bundle of herbs and the flask of balsam oil? When we read the Mishnah, we're wondering why those two items came together. A jug, something you're wearing, it seems to be.
Purpose.
I'm sorry?
They have the same purpose, to mask or to make things smell nice.
So I'm assuming so. I don't know so, but I'll tell you before that answer, which is a great answer. They're both with balsam. If you remember, the Rashi tells us that the bundle of herbs was mostly a balsam smell. And now we have a flask of balsam oil. So they're both the same genre, this kind of scent.
Okay, Rabbi, thank you. I'm leaving.
Reb Beryl, thank you. Before you go, Reb Beryl.
Yes.
Have you ever sold balsam herbs in your pharmacy?
Well, first of all, balsam is something that could be used with many things in it. You know, you could put stuff in there for burns and stuff.
So is it also
with it.
Is it also an air freshening kind of thing?
Yeah, it has a good smell. I think it's related to saps from trees, if I recall, something like that.
Interesting.
Okay.
All right, I don't mean to hold you up. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, yeah.
We have to take advantage. We still have a pharmacy on staff. So, Reb Allen, I hope you're engaged because we need you. All right.
He's from the old times. The new times we didn't use that.
Okay, now we have no. So now we've got a modern day pharmacist. Okay, good. All right, let's see. The Gemara asks a very good question. Probably a question you were wondering too. I was wondering. Koiveles man dechar shmei. You ever had a conversation? I've had it, where I walk by and people call me Rabbi, and then you think you're like in the middle of a conversation and you start responding, and then like you're not really talking to each other. You're like talking two different parallel conversations. It happens, I'm sure, sometimes. And the Gemara is asking, it sounds like we have two parallel conversations. They're not meeting up. They're zooming past each other. Rabbi Meir did not mention koiveles. Rabbi Meir is talking about a key, only a key. And Rabbi Elazar comes back and starts talking about a bundle of herbs. That's not an argument. That's just two people reading their shopping lists. So what's going on? That's the Gemara. Koiveles man dechar shmei. Whoever mentioned the koiveles, whoever mentioned this bundle of balsam herbs, other herbs. Herbs. I know, I'm going back to Rashi who used the word balsam. But okay, general herbs. The Gemara says, you know what? You're right. The text is problematic. It's so problematic that we need to actually amend the text to make it sound more farstandig, to make it make more sense. This happens, not often, but every once in a while, the Gemara will tell us, Chasuri Mechzer, the text is incomplete. We're missing a line, and we got to fill it in. Here's how you read it. We read as follows. Meir taught about a key that you shouldn't carry it. And similarly, Rabbi Meir says you shouldn't carry this bundle of herbs. And similarly, you shouldn't carry a jug of balsam oil. And if one did, they are liable to bring a sin offering because they've done a biblical breach of Shabbos. Rabbi Meir, that's the opinion of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Elazar agrees in one and argues in two. Rabbi Elazar agrees about the key, and that's my inference. Let's see if that's acceptable. But it looks like Rabbi Elazar he prohibits the key. He permits these two deodorizing, air freshening agents or tools, When would those be permitted to be carried? When they have a fine smell and that's their function. If it doesn't have a smell, if these two items are not there for air freshening and deodorizing, chayeves, then you are certainly chayev. What does it mean she'ein behem boisam? Isn't the whole definition of the kavelas and the tzleicha shel payatim that it's for smell? Yeah, but I guess sometimes you have to replace the cartridge with the scent, or maybe they didn't get finished fashioning. Let's see Rashi. Payatin yesh bahu chumarta hasuya kekamea the kivan the yesh baboisam tachshetulza sherech elal mishav hasei nami loy chayesh kedamin and dignosul. Apparently, the delivery system occasionally, again, Rashi, obviously, Rashi wasn't thinking in the term of a cartridge or whatever, but it seems from Rashi that sometimes you'd have this jug, or you might have this bundle, and it doesn't yet have the stuff inside of it. So that would certainly be a problem to carry. But when it has the smell, that's part of your presentation, and it's considered an ornament, and according to Rabbi Lazar, you'd be allowed to wear it. As you recall, we took a peek at the Shulchan Aruch, and the Beis Yosef and the Shulchan Aruch certainly paskins that one should not wear these around. It's quite plausible that in today's day and age, where there are a lot of different alternatives that don't necessitate carrying at all, it's all the more clear that one shouldn't wear such an item around their neck because it's not something that people do typically. So that is that. So again, let's just remember how we got here. We were talking about this kaivelas. And so we brought a brisa which has three opinions. Another brisa seemed to have a conflicting expression brought by Rabbi Lazar. And so we said no. He was responding to Rabbi Meir. We brought the full citation. And we discovered Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Lazar don't seem to be talking to each other. And so the Gemara told us, actually, that text is a shorthand and it's missing an important part of the conversation. And when we fill in the blanks, it all makes sense. Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Meir were talking about the kavelas, and they disagree about it. Rabbi Meir says, no way you can wear it. You gotta, it's desecration of Shabbas. Rabbi Lazar says, what are you talking about? It's part of the person's look. It's part of what a person wears, and it's necessary. And they're not going to carry it, so therefore you can wear it. But if it's not serving the function of air, of scent control, then you should not carry it, should not wear it on Shabbos. And if you did, you would actually be chayav chatas. So this revised or clarified text is actually nice in a number of ways. First of all, it's clear that they're actually arguing. But we also see a very conciliatory expression of Rabbi Lazar, where he's arguing with Rabbi Meir, but only in a very narrow situation. He's acknowledging the general premise of Rabbi Meir's opinion. He says, listen, if it's not for smell, it's certainly prohibited. And so there's a nice instance where they're disagreeing very politely and having a nuanced conversation. So there you have that. All right, so now the Gemara is going to say, based on this, we could infer something, we should be able to infer something else. Amar Rav Ada bar Ava. Rav Ada bar Ava is hearing the conversation. He's hearing the edited, revised, and clarified text of the Brisa, which records the debate between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Lazar about the boisam, about the perfume, about the smell, and says as follows. Hold on, if I understand you correctly, we must infer as follows. In an ironic situation, if you're carrying food in a dish, but it's pachas mechashir, it's less than the smallest measurement of food that's considered a serving. We might tighten up that definition, but that's how we'll keep it for now. Chayiv, one would be liable for carrying the dish. Before we see Rashi, let's see Rabbi Steinsaltz, who's going to paraphrase Rashi. Although one is not liable, again, I'm also changing. One is not liable for carrying the food in a public domain. On Shabbos, you shouldn't do so, but you're not liable for carrying a food. You are liable for carrying a dish. He is liable for carrying out the vessel. Why? Usually, so let me just clarify. On Shabbos, biblically at least, at this point in the Gemara, You're allowed to carry out a hot dog bun with a hot dog inside, no problem. If you're allowed to carry out the hot dog bun or any other food, you can even carry it in a little dish that carries it. Why? Because you're not carrying a dish, you're carrying food, and the food is like tuffle. It's like, when we talk about the different kinds of brachas, you have a food that's secondary. So when you look at one of those little, barbecue plate bowls, things they give you out with the, at the barbecue with the red and white colors on it, whatever. So you're not carrying that, you're carrying the food. You're just carrying that with the food. But if you have that dish without the food inside of it, well, all of a sudden the dish just becomes a plain old boring dish, and you're not allowed to carry a plain old boring dish. Again, back to the words of Rabbi Steinsaltz, who was explaining the Gemara. In that case, where there's no food or a small amount of food, the vessel is not subordinate to the food, and therefore it is significant. Because with perfume, since in which the flask where there's no perfume is like there was less than the required measurement of food in the vessel, and you're chayiv with the boisam, and you should similarly be chayiv with the food. Let's read Rashi now. If you're confused, I understand, because we just introduced a whole new topic, the topic of carrying food, and if the thing that's on it or in it could be tuffle to it, secondary to it, and not. So it's a new idea. If you're confused, I understand. Let's read Rashi and then let's discuss. The fact that our Mishnah says that when there's no air freshener, there's no perfume cartridge in the thing, you're chayiv. Alma, the kisav Rabbi Lazar. From here it's clear that Rabbi Lazar is of the position that if you're carrying food in a dish, but the dish has less than the smallest measurement of a serving, you're not chayiv for carrying food less than a gegaras, but you would still be liable for the vessel. We don't say in this instance that the vessel is secondary. It's like floating on top of the food. Okay, long story short. Later on in the Gemara, we're going to talk about other aspects of carrying and food. And so you see Rashi quotes the Gemara in Ayin Vav, which is only in 14 pages, so we're almost there. And then particularly in a chapter later on called Hamatzniya, that's 93b. And so we're going to do a lot of talking about this idea about a shear, pachas michashir. Is there a measurement, more than a measurement, less than a measurement? Suffice it to say, this is only being brought in parenthetically after explaining that the bundle or the flask that doesn't have the pleasant smell, then you're just carrying a vessel. And so the Gemara here is drawing a parallel between food and smell for that purpose. Rashi, he says, when it comes to food, you're only full if you had a certain amount of food. You only register a certain amount of food. Smell, even the smallest amount of scent or perfume already starts to do the job. And therefore, a scent, a small drop could count. I think, you have these diffusers and stuff, and sometimes just a little drop of whatever, people that do aromatherapy, sometimes the smallest drop can have a very, very powerful effect. So that was not only true today, that was also true back then. Rav Ashi says, no way, there's no comparison between the cartridge, the dish that holds smell, and a dish that holds food. Why? Maybe, usually I would say that even if there is a small amount of food, you're typically exempt. Food, you could be exempt even if it's a small amount of food. But when it comes to a flask that has no perfume in it, it's not small, it's zero. There's a difference between 0 and a fraction. That's essentially what Rashi says. Again, don't ask me to elaborate because math is certainly not my... But basically, a little food is a lot more than 0 smell. And so therefore, you can't compare the two. Even though the minutest amount of smell is already considered a shear. Let's see. So long story short, we have a discussion about if you're allowed to wear this smell, this perfume, diffuser, air freshener kind of thingy. 3 opinions. Yes, no, and epis. No, you may not. Yes, you may, and you shouldn't, but you aren't breaking a biblical prohibition. There was a brisa that seems to contradict a conflict, and so we resolved the conflict. In the process of bringing the conflict and resolving the conflict, we brought the full citation. In the process of bringing the full citation, we had to amend and clarify the original text of the brisa. Upon amending and giving us the full text of the brisa, we introduced a lot of nuance to the conversation. After hearing that conversation, Rav Ada says, hey, maybe we could have an analogy for a dish carrying a little bit of food. And the Gemara rejects it by saying that even the slightest amount of food is not comparable to an entirely empty cartridge. I prefer not to go down that road because we're going to spend we'll build it out properly in the next 15 pages or so. I'm saying in around 15 pages or so. But that is this discussion all about the koveles and if you can wear it or not. Any comments or questions before we take a sneak peek at the next few lines of Gemara and then call it a day? If you're muted, you're welcome to unmute yourself.
Rabbi, is it possible that the position that it's acceptable to wear it recognizes that people don't only wear it, a fragrance or perfume or whatever, to cover up a bad smell? Okay, there's a neutral, no smell. There's a bad smell, but on the other side, there's a good smell. So some people are not happy just to have a good smell, because some people have just a normal smell, no smell, let's call it. So by allowing this, you don't identify people and perhaps embarrass them who need this additional, smelling device,
right,
to cover up something that people would find offensive. I mean, it's just an interest.
Doctor, I love that question, but I want to throw something back at you.
Right.
Is it possible that the perspective you just shared, which sounds very reasonable, could that possibly be a reason to prohibit wearing it? What? If people don't only use it to combat negative smell, but they're also using it to introduce positive smell.
Right. And
you're asking if that might be the reason why it would be permissible, because it's a universal part of the wardrobe, right? And that's an interesting point that I think we need to consider. But I'm just throwing back at you, is it plausible?
I understand. Yeah. Okay.
And so it could also be a reason to prohibit. Why?
Because not everybody could afford to buy that or not.
I'll tell you more than that. We said that a person that has that's wearing this koveles to deal with a personal struggle that maybe they're ashamed of,
right? So
they're not going to share it at all. But once you tell me that even people that have a fine or neutral body odor also want to exude positive smell of perfume, well, then we've reactivated the likelihood that someone's going to take it off and show it to their friend, because there's no shame in it. If there's shame, you'll keep it hidden, or you'll keep it on your person. But if there's no shame, you might want to show it off. And so that the very rationale, which I love, which might have been used to understand why Rabbi Elazar says you can carry it, period, we could also twist it. Again, this is the way Gemara trains us to think. You can also use that very logic to further prohibit, because then someone may go ahead and show it off again. Alternatively, we could call upon an earlier statement from the Gemara that said that people of great, what was the word? I want to find the right words to use, but he said the people that wear these really, really schmancy jewelry, part of their etiquette would warrant not to take it off and show it off. You have to kind of passively let people. Sorry.
What you just quoted and what we have studied seems to me to be an example of a fence around the fence, like we don't allow to go out with this ornament because there is a possibility that she would show it to a friend. Mm-hmm. Actually, there is nothing wrong with this possibility.
Correct.
However, we still prohibit that because in addition to the possibility that she will show it to a friend, there is a possibility that in this process she will walk more than 4 cubits. So it seems like an additional precaution, an additional an additional prohibition that amounts to a fence around the fence.
So
This is
I like your comments. It's very interesting, but I want to share with you my understanding. My sense is, like you said, there's nothing wrong. The rabbis, Torah, have nothing wrong with a person showing off an exciting new accessory. That's absolutely fine. That's part of human nature. The only thing the Chacham are afraid of is that if we're gonna a thing that's likely to be shown off, inevitably will lead to people carrying it on. So I don't think there's like zera. We're not saying stop showing stuff to your friends. Because we don't trust you not to show something to your friend, we're not gonna let you wear it on. No, I think it's one single line of reasoning. Because it is entirely normal, acceptable, and common for people to show off their new toys and new accessories. For that very reason, the Chachamim said this is the item that makes one susceptible to carry. And so the fence is to not allow one to wear it. Now, Professor, I think where your logic is going, and it's still something we need to figure out, is assuming that there really is no problem carrying. If we could find an item that a person wears, but if they were to carry it, it would also not be a problem. That might be a fence to a fence. So for example, if we were to say that you're not allowed to wear this accessory in your home, because you might go into the public domain. And if you're in a public domain, you might take it up and show it to your friend. That would possibly be a fence to a fence. And this is a discussion that's actually had in a number of the Rishonim throughout our Gemara, not just in this part, but from the very beginning. Where exactly where does the restriction end? Because if you'll extend the restriction to the home, we'll have exactly the problem, Professor, that you're bringing up. And it's a good question and something that influences the conversation in both directions. So I want to thank you for pointing that out. I hope my comments about this particular instance, well, I want to hear if it sounds right, or if you still think it's Xer. All right, Shkoyach, Professor. Yes, Doctor.
So this, you have a kala. She just got engaged, and she has a watch, a new watch, and a diamond ring.
Mm-hmm.
So she goes. She could walk with them to shul.
So in the Mishnah, in the halacha of the Mishnah, no. Apparently not.
Uh-huh.
So your shaila is, why l'maisa do we find that we do wear jewelry? And that was a discussion that we read fairly early on in the Gemara, and I'm trying to remember now if we quoted the Taz with the Magen Avram. I'm drawing a blank now. We read really starting in the Rambam and in Tosfos that we find that today people do wear these items, even though the Mishnah says not to. And we were trying to figure out why that is, and we gave a number of possible explanations. Some of them, some of the opinions that we read said it's absolutely acceptable. There's no problem. Others say really you shouldn't, but we're not going to mess. We're gonna stay quiet because it's not gonna happen. And some of the explanations we gave is that in those days, people only wore jewelry on Shabbos, and so therefore the only time they had to show it up was on Shabbos, and therefore you don't want them to wear it. Whereas today, it's very common for women to have jewelry, and therefore there's not as much of a likelihood that they're going to take it off. Others try to explain. I think maybe the Rashba said that today there's no such thing as it, which is rejected by a lot of the halachic commentators. That today the odds of a person being in a biblical Rosh Hashanah are low. I'm assuming this is a time where most Jews lived in shtetls and not in large urban areas. And there were some other explanations as well. So your question is a good one. Can a kala wear it? Apparently that is the prevalent practice. Is a kala more susceptible to showing off the jewelry she got from her cousin than a person that's just wearing jewelry any given time? Absolutely. And so maybe there should be some additional concern. Interesting question. I'm certainly not going to give it a psak halacha, but if you have a kala that has this question, we should certainly do the research for them and get them
Probably not likely to take the ring off.
She shouldn't go to the Rabbanim on 47th Street for an answer.
I don't know. They might say, listen, we have to buy another. You have to buy
a weekday one. Okay, I'm sorry. Mark, I'm sorry I interrupted.
Go ahead. Off the ring to show it off.
Yeah.
It's more like show it on hand.
You know, let's call it a day here because we're starting from this line. It really ends the topic, and then there's a whole nother Agadic discussion which we'll enjoy the Ezer Hashem tomorrow. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today. In just 4 minutes, Rabbi Shalom Ber is going to reactivate the link for the study of today's Chumash. Respect everyone for being on today and for your input, discussion, and sage perspectives. Have a wonderful day. Let's have only good news. Hope to see you all tomorrow. Same time, same link. Yashir Koyach.
Go.
This was very discouraging, this class.
Why?
Because
Let's
if
hear.
what I would have known then that I know now, I could have been a multimillionaire.
Let's hear. What would you have done?
I wouldn't. I've mixed. I could have mixed various things to make perfumes.
That's true.
You know, I didn't have to walk around with a woman. My wife wouldn't have to walk around with a basket on her head.
Well, let me tell you something. If you would have lived back then, you wouldn't have just been a pharmacist. You would have been doing medical procedures too. Right?
Probably. Yeah.
Certainly bloodletting and teeth pulling and who knows what else you would be doing. All right. Have a wonderful day. Thank you all.
All right.